Hello, my name is Nick Huntington Klein. In this video, I'm going to be talking about wage differentials and the reasons for them. So first of all, what is a wage differential? A wage differential is any time you see two people and they're working in jobs and they are paying different amounts. That's it. So you got two people and they're getting paid different amounts at their job. And we can think about, well, what are all of the reasons why we might see that two different people are going to get paid two different wages? So we'll start with a baseline one. So we're going to start with what's called human capital. So human capital is a reference to the skills that people have. So if you have a lot of skills, if you are a very productive employee, if you make a lot of money for your employer, we would say that you have a lot of human capital. That's all that it is. And we call it human capital because you can sort of think of it like an investment in yourself. So for example, if you train yourself and you get a lot of skills, then that costs you stuff now as you put effort into training yourself, but then that pays off later, like a piece of capital, right? Like if you invested in something, right? So that's what human capital is. So human capital says if you are more productive and the labor market is competitive, then you should get paid in a rough proportion to what it is that you produce for your employer. And so the more that you produce for them, the more you are going to get paid. This, of course, assumes that the labor market is competitive. And this needs to be the case for human capital to work as an explanation of wage differentials. Because why would you get paid more just for being a more productive employee? Well, if you are more productive than the person sitting next to you, but you're getting paid the same, then some other company could just hire you away and they would be willing to pay you more because you're going to make them more money. And you would say yes, because they're paying you more money. And so you would expect that the wages would correlate to what it is that you're producing for your company. There are two different main kinds of human capital. One is general human capital, which is just sort of a general level of skills that would apply generally to all sorts of jobs. So things like the ability to read, the ability to show up on time, the ability to be nice to the clients, right? These are kinds of general human capital, and just some people have more of it and some people have less. And so you would expect to get paid more based on that, right? These skills make you more productive, and in a competitive labor market, more productivity means more pay. There's also specific human capital. So specific human capital is human capital that applies to a specific industry or a specific job in that industry or even a specific firm in that industry. And these are kinds of skills that do not translate across jobs. So for example, if you know how to do surgery, that is a skill that is very applicable in the field of surgery, or if you're a doctor, and it's not very applicable if you are a car mechanic, right? So if you have a bunch of surgery skills, that does not really apply to your level of productivity as a mechanic. So what specific human capital does is it means that the markets for labor are many different separate markets, right? We have the market for doctors and we have the market for car mechanics. And if you think back to our competitive market discussion, what happens if we have a lot of profit in one market and there's less profit over here in the other one? Well, what's going to happen is people are going to leave this market and they're going to go be suppliers in this market over here. But if there's specific human capital at play, that can't happen. Right? If the wages of mechanics go way up, everyone wants to be a mechanic. But if all you have are your surgery skills, well, that's not really going to help you. You can't go become a mechanic, even though the wages are really high over here, because you don't have the right specific human capital. And so specific human capital can keep wage differentials alive because people can't respond to wage changes by swapping from one job to the other because they might not have the specific human capital necessary to do that. So we can have, let's say, mechanics getting paid a lot and doctors getting paid a little, if that was the state of the world, and that would not go away. That differential would not go away because the doctors could not go become mechanics even if they wanted to, because they don't have the right specific human capital. Okay, so that's human capital. That is an explanation. It's a very fair explanation of why there's wage differentials, right? We would make sense. We would want people who are more productive maybe to get paid more. At least it's a meritocratic kind of thing. However, there are a lot of reasons why two different people would get paid different wages that have nothing to do with their productivity. So let's now, from everything from this point on in the video, let's imagine we're talking about comparing people who have the exact same level of skills, right? So the exact same level of skills, and yet still, even though they're exactly as productive for their employer as each other, one of them is getting paid more and one of them is getting paid less. We still have wage differentials. Why is that? So let's talk about 4 different reasons. There are many more that we're not going to cover. We're going to cover these 4 in particular. The first one we're going to cover is compensating differentials. Compensating differentials says that if you want somebody to take a job, what are you compensating them with? Well, you're compensating them with money. That's one thing. But also, The job itself might have some values that they want. So for example, if you have a very nice work environment, maybe people would be willing to take a slightly lower wage because they get this nice work environment. Or perhaps maybe the job itself is very noble and everyone's going to look up to you because you have this job, right? Maybe you just really enjoy the job. For example, teaching. People who teach, they love being teachers. And the pay for teachers is not particularly high. One thing that's going on there is compensating differentials. A lot of those teachers could go get other jobs that paid them more, but they don't do that. Why don't they do that? Because they really like being teachers. And that's not to say that we shouldn't pay them more, but that is to say that if you can get people to do the job without paying them more, well, that is an explanation for why they might not get paid more. And so that's an example of compensating differentials. People are willing to take a lower pay in order to work a job that they really want to work at, and so they're going to get paid less. So you would expect, based on compensating differentials, that jobs people really want to work at are going to pay less. Jobs that people don't want to work at are going to have to pay more in order to attract employees. Another good example of this is programmers. A lot of programmers really like video games, and so a lot of them get into programming because they want to work on video games. And so if you're a video game software company, you can offer a lower wage than other kinds of software companies because people really want to work on video games, and they're willing to take that pay cut in order to do it. So that's compensating differentials as an explanation for why different kinds of jobs might pay more or less, because maybe if it's a job that people really want to work at, they're willing to take a lower wage. Next, labor unions. Labor unions are an explanation of why two different people with the same level of skill might get paid different amounts. We talked before about monopoly. Monopoly is when you have a single provider and there's no competition for that provider, right? So a union is an example of getting yourself some pricing power. So if you just have a bunch of workers at a company and each of those workers is negotiating separately with the company, well, they're all competing against each other, and competition lowers prices. So you would expect that if those workers band together and they all negotiate as a single block, then they can negotiate for higher wages because they have generated for themselves some pricing power. So they can manage to charge a higher wage, and the employer can't just say no because who else are they going to hire, right? Everyone's going to go through the union. So you would expect that if you have two jobs, the exact same job, and the employees are exactly as skilled as each other, the employees that have the union are going to get paid more because they have that pricing power to be able to demand a higher wage. And I say wage, that wage could come in the form of money. It could also be in the form of benefits or pensions or things like that. Whatever it is that you're getting paid with, the labor union can lobby for more of that. Okay, so we've had human capital, which explains why different skills are going to get compensated differently. We've had compensating differentials, which says that you might accept a different job at a lower pay because it has some other qualities that you want. We also talked about labor unions, where the bunch of employees coming together and negotiating as one can get you to a higher wage because of pricing power. The last two are about discrimination on a personal basis. They're about how people might get paid more or less based on who they are. So the first, and we're going to talk about the two forms of this that economists talk about most often. There are, of course, other forms of personal discrimination that we're just not going to cover here in this class, but I would recommend that you go seek out information about this sort of stuff, especially if you're really interested. Go look into some sociology of labor stuff. They have a lot on discrimination that you can really get into. So the first one I'm going to talk about is called taste-based discrimination. Taste-based discrimination is when somebody gets paid less on the basis of a personal distaste against a group of people. And so you can imagine how this would work. Imagine that there is an employer who has a distaste against hiring a particular group of people. They don't like them. They have a bias against these people. They have a prejudice against these people. So one of two things is going to happen. Either they're only willing to hire those people if they can get a really great deal, if they can pay them a lot less than they're worth, which would obviously lead to a wage differential. If you're in this group that's being discriminated against, you're getting paid less because that's the only way that the employer will agree to hire you. People who are not in that group, they're going to get paid more for that same reason. Or that employer who discriminates is not willing to hire them at all. And you might think, well, okay, well, when they get paid fairly at other companies, but those other companies can take advantage of that, right? Even if they don't have that personal bias against it, they still might say, you know what, this group of people, they're having a hard time getting jobs because some people discriminate. I don't want to discriminate, but I also recognize that I can get them for a bargain. Because they're having a hard time getting a job. And so if I'm profit maximizing, I'm still going to offer them lower wages. and discriminate against them in that way because I know they're going to have a hard time getting a job. So I'm going to offer them a lower wage. So even if they end up working at companies that don't discriminate, they still are going to get paid less because of that personal taste-based discrimination. The other kind of discrimination, personal discrimination we could talk about is statistical discrimination. Statistical discrimination is about an employer making a blanket assumption about a group of people based on their beliefs about the productivity of that group of people. So they don't have a personal preference against the group of people. They don't dislike them. But they have differing opinions about how productive they think that group is. So this goes back to the human capital explanation, where in a competitive market, people are going to get paid based on their productivity. However, we don't actually know how productive someone's going to be before we hire them. So we have to make a guess about their productivity. And we might make that guess based on the kind of group that they belong to, right? So we might have an assumption like, I think that this group of people is more or less productive than other groups of people. So when I see somebody from that group come in, I'm going to offer them a wage based on how productive I think they are, which is based on how productive I think their group is. Now that's going to be unfair. Imagine that you are much more productive than the average person in your group. Well, then I'm not going to offer you your fair wage. Or imagine that the employer is just wrong about how productive they think that group is. If they assume that a group is less productive than they actually are, well, then that group's not going to get paid very much, even if they are actually quite productive. And so you'd have two people with the exact same skill, but because this group is from a discriminated against group, because of the assumptions that people make about that group's productivity, they're going to get paid less, and this group's going to get paid more. All right, so we've sort of gone rapid fire through 6 different reasons why 2 different people might get paid different wages. Some of those reasons are based on the differing kinds of skills that those people have, the differing human capital that they have. But even if we assume that people have the same level of skill, the same level of human capital, we can still see wage differentials between people, either based on people taking jobs they really like at lower wages, compensating differentials, based on labor unions, people coming together and arguing and negotiating as a group, which gives them pricing power so they can charge more for their labor, or personal discrimination based on either taste-based discrimination of personal preference against a group of people, which makes it harder for them to get a job, so they end up taking lower wages, or statistical discrimination based on assumptions that employers make about the productivity of groups of people, which leads to them getting paid more or less based on the group that they belong to and the assumptions that people have about that group. All right, that's it. Thank you.